Restorative justice, broadly speaking, there's so many different ways to define it, but broadly speaking, it's about participation, it's about democracy, it's about getting people involved. But the more classic example or definition is that we look at the processes used to deal with a particular issue or a harm. When a harm has been done, we want to focus on the needs of the victim. We want to focus on the obligations of the offender. We want to do that in a process that's collaborative, where all the people who have a stake in the particular situation are involved, and where there's some form of consensus decision making. So it's not just a one person or a three-panel judge, or three-person panel making a decision. That would be a more confined decision or definition of restorative justice. But I like looking at it in the broader sense, like I said, of democracy, and it's important to say it's a set of practices and principles. I mean, that's important to say. So practices such as conferencing or circle work. I personally don't like the phrase mediation because there's a connotation there of an even playing field. But that still gets used a lot in terms of the restorative justice, broadly speaking, movement. And of the principles, I mentioned them. Some of them I mentioned earlier, just in talking about some of the test cases. The notion of competency building, when an offender leaves an intervention, a restorative intervention, he or she should have some greater competency. The notion of the victim clearly having his or her needs met through that conference and having his or her voice heard. It's the word voice. It just triggered in me some of my recent work in some of the Milwaukee public schools. There's one young man just finished high school who came into the class we were doing. We took over a civics class to create a circle, a group of students who would be circle keepers for the school. This is just the beginning. It would be the lower end types of cases of referrals for discipline, and it was just called the restorative circle class. And towards the end, we wanted the students to come up with a name for the group, and he came up with the phrase "unheard voices." And I thought, whoa! Now this is a gritty urban high school. This is by no means a top-notch school, and the class was not cherry-picked from within the school. It was just a random assignment of students. But this young man was clearly a kid with, despite coming from this lower-end school and et cetera, with all of the stuff he's got going against him, he's going on to one of the local colleges, and he will succeed. But he took to the restorative practices stuff after an initial phase of standing up and saying, "I'm not snitching, I'm not being involved in this, I don't want to participate in this." But he got it after about a week and a half, and but that phrase that he came up with, unheard voices, the notion of having the opportunity and having everybody at the table share their story, the collaborative process is huge. And so his phrase was just kind of rings in my head a lot. But the key principle is that crime or harm or wrongdoing is an offense against relationships, and through the legal system we so often look at it as an offense against rules or statutes. So, and of course, what do you do in law school? You learn the statutes. And then the other thing you do in law school is learn how to joust through the rules. Rules of evidence, after all, are ways to either expand or curtail storytelling. So when you create a different process for the storytelling, we're going against the grain of what goes on in law school. So I continue to say to people that the two systems can exist side by side totally, because I don't advocate trashing the traditional justice system. There are times when it's absolutely appropriate and absolutely necessary. It's just that we, as the justice system, should be wiser in looking at different tools. And people who poo-poo restorative practices as being namby-pamby or wimpy or whatever, just aren't being wise. It's like they can't hold two ideas at the same time. They can't understand that there are different processes that will work for different people. And clearly, if they want to serve victims, they should be offering it. And that's for no other reason they should be doing it. They should be allowing for restorative practices. So. Well, the notion of faith in this work, is is important to me. Oftentimes people will say this work is a way towards forgiveness. And I'm a little worrisome. I'm a little worried about jumping to the F word, to forgiveness, so quickly. In Jewish thought, people earn forgiveness through stages. So clearly, a restorative conference of having the meeting and allowing the victim to hear from the offender, and to assess how the offender is making his or her apology or what the story is. That's real important. So it fits into that part of Jewish thinking. Just generally, I love approaching this work from my Jewish perspective. Around that notion of forgiveness being an F word in terms of foisting it on victims, around the notion of holding people accountable, around the notion of Howard Zinn wrote about this in Changing Lenses. I mean, one of the early books in this continent about this work, about shalom and peace, but not just peace as an absence of war, but peace as in a holistic view of a way of being, which really is what shalom in the Hebrew context means. Shalem, the same root, has to do with whole. It literally means whole. It resonates for me. I love being out in the community talking as a Jew about this, and inevitably it always comes up. It's important.